Vin Diesel sat in his favorite cafe in Los Angeles, sipping an espresso while watching the cars pass by. The day promised to be peaceful, nothing out of the ordinary. The cafe buzzed with quiet conversations, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The sun cast a warm glow over the street, and for once, Vin allowed himself to relax. Moments like these were rare, and he intended to enjoy them. But the tranquility was shattered. A man burst onto the street, gasping for air as if he had been running for miles. His shirt was stained with dirt, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were filled with sheer panic. He frantically scanned the street, searching for something or someone. Then his gaze locked onto Vin. Without hesitation, he rushed forward. "You have to help me," the man pleaded, gripping Vin's arm. Vin slowly placed his cup on the table, his sharp eyes narrowing as he assessed the stranger. Years of experience had taught him to be cautious. "I don't do that kind of work, brother. If you're in trouble, go to the police." "There's no time." The man's voice was desperate, his hands trembling. "They took my family. If I don't bring them the money in an hour, they'll kill them." The word family struck Vin like a bolt of lightning. He had heard many stories, seen many tragedies, but nothing cut deeper than the threat against loved ones. Family was everything. He couldn't just walk away. "Where are they?" Vin's voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. The man fumbled with his phone, his fingers shaking as he pulled up a message. A ransom demand. A meeting point at an abandoned dock near the harbor. The time was ticking. Vin exhaled slowly, then stood up, his towering presence emanating quiet power. He reached into his pocket, tossed some cash onto the table for the coffee, and turned to the man. "Get in the car." The stranger hesitated for a split second, as if he couldn't believe this was happening. But there was no time for questions. He nodded quickly and followed Vin. The black Dodge Charger roared to life, its engine growling like a beast unleashed. As they sped off through the city streets, the man clutched his seatbelt, his breath still unsteady. "How many of them?" Vin asked, eyes fixed on the road. I don't know exactly. Maybe 3, maybe 4. "Are they armed?" "I think so." Vin nodded, absorbing the information. His grip on the steering wheel tightened as they neared their destination. There was no turning back now. The city lights blurred into streaks as the Dodge Charger tore through the streets, weaving effortlessly between late-night traffic. Vin's hands were steady on the wheel, his focus razor-sharp. Every second counted. The man beside him was fidgeting, his leg bouncing anxiously. He kept glancing at his phone, the timer on the ransom demand ticking down. 52 minutes left. "What's your name?" Vin asked without taking his eyes off the road. "Daniel," the man stammered. "Daniel Carter." "All right, Daniel. Take a deep breath. Panicking won't help them." Daniel tried to steady his breathing, but his hands were still shaking. I never thought something like this could happen. My wife, my son. I should have protected them." Vin's jaw tightened. He had heard this before, seen men break under the weight of helplessness. But there was always a way. "We're gonna get them back. You just need to trust me." Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. As they neared the industrial district, Vin killed the headlights and slowed the car. The docks loomed ahead, shadowed silhouettes of shipping containers stacked like a labyrinth. A few dim floodlights buzzed overhead, casting long, eerie shadows. The place was deserted, except for a cluster of black SUVs parked near an old warehouse. Vin pulled the Charger behind a row of crates and shut off the engine. "Stay here," he said firmly. "If anything goes wrong, drive. Don't look back." Daniel's eyes widened. "But..." "No buts. I need to move fast, and I can't do that if I'm worrying about you." Daniel hesitated, then gave a weak nod. Vin stepped out, closing the door silently behind him. He scanned the area, mapping out the terrain. There were at least 5 men, maybe more inside. 2 near the cars, one smoking, the other pacing. Another at the entrance, casually gripping a shotgun. Vin moved like a shadow, keeping low as he crept along the stacks of containers. He needed a closer look. Slipping behind a rusted truck, he overheard one of the men talking on a radio. "Yeah, the money better be here soon. The boss ain't patient." Another voice crackled through. "If it's not, we take the kid first. Make sure the father understands we don't bluff." Vin's grip tightened into fists. That wasn't going to happen. He spotted a metal rod lying nearby and picked it up. The first step was taking out their numbers quietly. He exhaled once, steadying his pulse, then moved in. Vin moved like a shadow, his body low, his steps calculated. The air smelled of salt and rust, the scent of old shipping containers and the sea mixing in the cold night breeze. Every muscle in his body was dense, coiled like a spring, ready to strike. He knew he had no room for mistakes. One wrong move could mean death, not just for him, but for Daniel's family as well. Peering around the edge of a shipping crate, he took in the layout of the dock. The old warehouse was dimly lit, a single flickering floodlight casting long shadows across the pavement. The large sliding door was slightly ajar, allowing a faint glow from the inside to seep through. From his vantage point, Vince spotted two armed men standing guard at the entrance. One was leaning against the wall, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he lazily flicked the ash onto the ground. The other was scrolling through his phone, his grip on his pistol loose, careless. Vin exhaled slowly. Amateurs. He waited for the smoker to turn his head, then sprang into action. Moving with lethal precision, he closed the distance in seconds, wrapping a powerful arm around the man's neck and clamping a hand over his mouth. The man struggled for a moment, his body jerking, but Vin squeezed tighter, cutting off his air. Within seconds, the fight drained from him, and he slumped unconscious into Vin's arms. The second guard heard the faint scuffle and looked up, confused. But by the time he registered the danger, Vin was already on him. He lunged, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it violently. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the pavement. Before he could react, Vin drove his elbow into the man's gut, knocking the wind out of him. The guard staggered backward, gasping, but Vin didn't give him a chance to recover. He landed a swift punch to the temple, and the man dropped like a stone. Two down. Now for the ones inside. Vin crouched and picked up the fallen guard's pistol, quickly checking the magazine. Fully loaded. Good. He pressed himself against the warehouse wall, edging closer to the door. Through the gap, he could see inside. Three men. One of them stood out immediately, the leader. He was taller than the others, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in this rundown dock. He sat casually on a wooden crate, flipping a knife between his fingers, his expression cold and detached. His confidence told Vin everything he needed to know. This wasn't his first time doing something like this. Against the far wall, a woman and a young boy sat tied up, their hands bound, their mouths gagged. The woman's eyes were wide with terror, darting between the men. The boy clung to her, his small body trembling. Vin's jaw tightened. The leader checked his watch and smirked. 4 minutes, he said, his voice eerily calm. If the money isn't here by then, we start with the kid. Vin felt his grip tighten around the pistol. Time to move. Vin took a deep breath, steadying his pulse. Rushing in blindly wasn't an option. 3 men, all armed, one of them likely experienced. He needed an advantage. His eyes darted around the dimly lit warehouse, searching for anything he could use. Then he spotted an old metal beam running along the ceiling with a chain hoist attached. If he could use the element of surprise, he could take them down before they even had a chance to react. Moving silently, he slipped through the door, keeping low behind a stack of wooden crates. The leader was still seated on the crate, flipping his knife absent-mindedly, while the other 2 men stood nearby, one holding a shotgun, the other a pistol. They weren't paying attention to anything but their boss, assuming no one would dare interfere. That was their first mistake. Vin picked up a rusted wrench from the floor, weighing it in his hand. He aimed carefully, then hurled it across the room. It clattered loudly against a metal shelf, the noise echoing through the warehouse. "What the hell was that?" one of the thugs muttered, gripping his shotgun tighter. "Go check it out," the leader said without looking up. The man hesitated, then slowly made his way toward the source of the noise, his weapon raised. Vin pressed himself against the crates, muscles tensed. As soon as the thug passed him, Vin struck. In one swift motion, he grabbed the man's shotgun, wrenching it from his grasp while simultaneously delivering a brutal knee to his stomach. The man doubled over, gasping for air. Before he could call out, Vin swung the butt of the shotgun into the back of his head, knocking him out cold. One down. The other thug turned at the sound of the impact, his pistol raising too slow. Vin fired the shotgun, the blast deafening in the enclosed space. The thug was thrown backward, crashing into a stack of crates. His gun clattered to the ground, his body limp. Two down. The leader didn't even flinch. He simply sighed, stood up, and dusted off his suit. "Impressive," he said, rolling his shoulders. "But you just cost that family their lives." He moved fast, pulling a sleek silver pistol from his jacket and aiming it directly at the boy. Vin didn't hesitate. He dived forward, rolling across the floor as the gunshot rang out. The bullet missed by inches, splintering the wood behind him. Vin came up on one knee, leveling the shotgun. But before he could fire, the leader kicked over a barrel, sending it crashing into Vin and knocking the weapon from his grip. The man was on him instantly, swinging his knife in a deadly arc. Vin barely dodged, feeling the blade slice through the air just inches from his face. He countered with a brutal punch to the man's ribs, but the leader barely flinched. He was tougher than he looked. The two men circled each other, muscles tense, eyes locked. The fight was far from over. Vin's body burned with exhaustion, his breath coming in heavy, labored gasps. The leader's eyes were cold, calculating, and they locked onto Vin like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The knife glinted in the dim light as the man twirled it expertly, his posture one of pure confidence. Vin's fingers itched to grab something, anything. His shotgun was just out of reach, but it was no longer useful for this kind of close combat. He needed to think fast. His eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail, every object that could be turned into a weapon. The leader lunged first, his knife flashing through the air. Vin barely managed to twist out of the way, feeling the blade cut a shallow line across his arm. The pain was sharp, but it fueled his resolve. He swung a fist toward the leader's face, but the man parried with his knife, their bodies close enough now that Vin could feel the heat of his opponent's breath. He needed to get inside the leader's guard, had to land a hit before he was cut again. The man's movements were fast, controlled, but there was an arrogance to his style, a sense that he thought he had already won. That's what Vin was counting on. The leader struck again, aiming for Vin's side. This time, Vin was ready. He sidestepped and grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it sharply, forcing the knife away. With his other hand, he drove an elbow into the leader's stomach. The blow staggered him, and for a split second, Vin had the upper hand. But the leader recovered quickly. He shoved Vin back, regaining his stance. Blood dripped from Vin's arm, the wound shallow but enough to slow him down. The leader smirked. "You're fast, I'll give you that, but you're not good enough," he taunted, his voice low and threatening. Vin's pulse thundered in his ears. He couldn't afford to let his guard down again. He had to finish this now. Without warning, he feinted left, causing the leader to overcommit to a counterattack. That was the moment Vin had been waiting for. With one swift motion, he grabbed the leader's arm, locking it behind his back in a painful hold. The knife dropped to the floor, and Vin slammed the man into a nearby crate, pinning him there with his full weight. The leader snarled, but Vin wasn't finished. He turned the man around, grabbing him by the collar and lifting him off the ground. "I'm not here for you," Vin growled, his face inches from the leader's. "But I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." The man's eyes flashed with rage, but it was too late. Vin's grip tightened, and with one powerful motion, he threw the leader to the ground. The thug lay there, dazed and unable to move, as Vin stood over him, panting heavily. Vin's gaze shifted to the woman and the boy, who had been silently watching the struggle unfold. The woman's face was pale with fear, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes now. The boy was still trembling, but he looked more secure knowing that the danger had passed. Vin walked over to them, kneeling down to cut their restraints. "You're safe now," he said, his voice steady, though his body was still on high alert. The woman blinked, her hands shaking as she rubbed her wrists. "How can we ever thank you?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. Vin stood up, his face softening. "You don't need to thank me. Just get to safety. That's all that matters." He turned and looked back at the leader, who was slowly rising to his feet, eyes burning with fury. Vin knew the man wouldn't stay down for long, but that wasn't his concern. He had done what he came here to do. Turning to leave, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Don't come back," he warned, his voice cold. With one last look, Vin stepped out of the warehouse and into the night, the sound of approaching sirens growing louder in the distance. The job was done, but the war was far from over. The warehouse was silent now, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional groan of the wind through the cracked windows. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting pale light through the industrial skyline. Vin stood at the entrance, watching as the first responders arrived, their sirens cutting through the morning stillness. His job here was done, but the weight of what had just happened hung heavy on him. He didn't look back as the paramedics rushed past him, heading toward the woman and her son. They would be okay now. They had a second chance at life. But Vin knew better than anyone nothing ever truly went back to normal. The leader of the group he'd taken down would wake up soon enough. Vin could hear the man's muffled groans in the distance, but he didn't care. There were bigger problems waiting for him. He had no intention of sticking around to explain things to the authorities. They'd get their story, but it wasn't his. The less they knew about him, the better. He was already moving before he realized it, his steps swift, purpose-driven. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He pulled it out, seeing Daniel's name flash on the screen. For a moment, Vin hesitated. He had always made it a point to keep his personal life separate from the work he did. But Daniel was different, he was family now. Vin answered the call. "Vin, are you alright?" Daniel's voice was thick with concern, though it was clear he was trying to keep calm. "I'm fine," Vin said, his voice low but steady. "The woman and her son are safe. The rest of them. They won't be causing any more trouble." There was a pause on the other end, then Daniel sighed, a sound of relief. "Good. I don't know what I'd do without you, man. I owe you everything." Vin's eyes narrowed as he glanced over his shoulder, his mind still on the events of the past few hours. "No need to thank me, Daniel. You know I'd do anything for family. But this isn't over. There's always someone else. Always. I know. But just take care of yourself, okay? You've got your own family to protect now." Vin rubbed his temple, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Family. It was more than just the blood that ran through your veins, it was the people who would have your back no matter the cost. "Yeah, I hear you. I'll be alright," Vin said, though he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. As he ended the call, he looked up at the rising sun. The world was waking up around him, but he felt strangely disconnected from it. The events of the night had blurred the line between right and wrong, good and bad. But he knew one thing for certain: he'd do whatever it took to keep his family safe, no matter the cost. There would be more battles, more enemies. But for now, this one was over. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. With one last glance at the warehouse, he turned and walked toward his car. He had a long road ahead, but he was ready for whatever came next. Because as long as his family was in danger, he'd never stop fighting. Vin didn't have time to rest. The moment he was behind the wheel of his car, he felt the tension creeping back into his shoulders. The job was done, but something gnawed at the back of his mind, an instinct that told him the calm wouldn't last long. Every time he thought he could put his past behind him, it came rushing back, dragging him deeper into the web he had worked so hard to escape. His phone buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't Daniel. It was an encrypted message from an unknown number. Vin's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, hesitating. He knew better than to trust anything that came from a number he didn't recognize, but there was something in the way the message was worded that sent a chill down his spine. "You've made a mistake. We know what you did. And now, we're coming for you." The message ended with a simple symbol, a black circle, with lines cutting through it, like a mark of warning. Vin had seen that symbol before. It was the mark of the organization he thought he had escaped. The same organization that had nearly destroyed his life years ago. The same people who had taken everything from him. For a brief moment, Vin's pulse quickened. He'd hoped he was done with them. Hoped he could live a quiet life. But the reality was, there was no escaping the past. It was always lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. Vin's jaw tightened. He'd known this day would come. There was no way they would let him slip away unscathed. They'd never forget what he did to them. He gripped the steering wheel harder, his knuckles white. He had two choices: run or fight. But running had never been his style. He was done hiding. The next few minutes were a blur as he sped down the winding streets, trying to shake off the feeling that he was being watched. The streets were empty this early in the morning, the world still asleep. But Vin knew better than to think he had any real privacy. His past was a shadow that followed him everywhere, and it was about to catch up with him. He reached his safe house, a nondescript building in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place no one would notice, no one would care about. But to him, it was home. It was where he could regroup, plan his next move. But he wasn't fooling himself, this wouldn't be a simple escape. They were already on his trail, and it was only a matter of time before they found him. Vin slammed the car door shut, his mind racing. He needed information, he needed to know how deep this went. They wouldn't have sent a message like that unless they were already aware of his every move. He couldn't trust anyone anymore. The first step was always the same: find the people who could help him, the ones who owed him a favor, or the ones who would be stupid enough to think they could take him on. It was a game of chess, and he was always one move ahead. But this time, he had a feeling the board was about to change. He quickly made his way to a hidden compartment under the floorboards, retrieving a burner phone and a small stack of cash. The money would keep him off the radar for a while, and the phone would give him access to contacts he hadn't used in years. Vin dialed the first number on the list, a name he hadn't spoken in over 5 years. A contact from his old life, someone who had once been a trusted ally. The phone rang for a few seconds before the line clicked, and a voice he didn't recognize answered. "Who is this?" Vin's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the voice of his old ally. This wasn't someone he'd expected to hear. "I need information," Vin said, his voice low, almost menacing. "I need to know everything you've got on an organization called the Black Circle." There was a long pause on the other end. Then the voice responded, its tone cold. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into." Vin's grip tightened around the phone. "I don't care. I'm coming for them. You better be ready." Before the voice could respond, he hung up, his mind already racing through his options. The Black Circle wasn't just a criminal group, it was a network of power, influence, and reach. And if they were coming after him, that meant they were already entrenched in places he couldn't even imagine. Vin needed to move fast. He couldn't afford to wait for them to make the first move. They had made their intentions clear, and now it was his turn to make a stand. As he packed his things and prepared to leave, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was another message. This one was simple, direct. "We know where you are." Vin's gaze hardened. They weren't wasting any time. He had no more illusions about his situation. The fight was coming to him, whether he was ready or not. And when it came, he would be ready. This time, there would be no escape. Only the fight. Only the war that had been waiting for him since the moment he decided to protect his family. Vin stood at the edge of the rooftop, the city sprawling out before him, its lights flickering like the heartbeat of the world beneath him. His hand gripped the edge of the cold concrete, the breeze whipping through his hair, and for a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. The night was calm, too calm, and the quiet weighed on him like a heavy shroud. He had done everything he could to prepare. His escape routes were set, his plans in motion. But he knew deep down that there was no escaping the war that had followed him. The Black Circle wasn't just a threat, it was a storm, and he was standing right in the center of it. He had contacted the few allies he could trust, but even their help came with strings attached. The network of shadows that once served him was now a broken mirror, shattered by betrayal and time. There were no guarantees in this game, only the cold certainty that one wrong move could cost him everything. Vin's phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was an image. A grainy photo of a dark alley. In the center of the image stood a figure shrouded in black, unrecognizable. And at their feet, lying motionless, was a familiar face. The face of the woman and child he had saved. Your next mistake will cost you more than just your life. Come alone. Or we start with them. Vin's jaw tightened. This was it. There was no more running. The Black Circle knew everything. They had found his weakness. Without hesitation, he turned and moved quickly toward the exit. He didn't need to think about it. The decision had already been made for him. He would go. Alone. He would face them and end this once and for all, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had left. The warehouse, the location in the photo, was only a few miles away. Vin didn't waste any time. The streets blurred past him as he drove, his focus razor sharp. The woman and child might have been the Black Circle's leverage, but Vin knew their real target was him. It had always been him. When he arrived, the area was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. The alley was narrow, littered with debris, its shadows thick with the smell of decay. Vin parked his car at the mouth of the alley, the headlights cutting through the darkness. He stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with deliberate force, the air heavy around him. His hand hovered near the holster at his side, the weight of the gun comforting but unnecessary. This was his fight. His reckoning. The Black Circle wasn't just a group of criminals, it was a brotherhood, a network bound by blood and secrets. They had tried to bury him once before, but they underestimated him. They'd made him into a weapon, but he'd learned to turn that weapon against them. As he walked deeper into the alley, the silhouette of a man appeared ahead. The same figure from the photo. The man was tall, his face obscured by a hood. He stood motionless, a perfect shadow in the darkness. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," the man said, his voice cold. Vin stopped, his gaze fixed on the figure. "I'm not here for a conversation. I'm here to end this," Vin replied, his voice steady. The man chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. "And it? You think it's that simple? You've been a thorn in our side for too long, Diesel. You think you can just walk away from the life you've led?" Vin's eyes narrowed. "I'm not walking away. I'm taking it all down." The man stepped forward, revealing a glint of metal blade in his hand. "You can't do this alone. You never have. You've always relied on others to fight for you." Vin's grip tightened on his gun, but he didn't raise it. "Not yet. I don't need anyone else," he said, his voice as cold as the steel he carried. "I've got this." The man lunged, the knife flashing toward Vin's throat. In one smooth motion, Vin sidestepped, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it, forcing him to drop the blade. The fight was swift, brutal, each movement calculated to subdue, not to kill. He wasn't here for a prolonged battle. He had no time for games. With a final twist, the man crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Vin stood over him for a moment, chest heaving. He could feel the presence of more men approaching. He wasn't done yet. More Black Circle soldiers appeared from the shadows, closing in around him. They were armed, but Vin didn't flinch. He had been through worse. He had fought bigger, badder enemies. But this time, there would be no mercy. The first man launched, and Vin took him down in an instant, his movements fluid, precise. The others tried to follow, but they were no match for him. In moments, the alley was silent, the threat eliminated. But the woman and the child were still somewhere out there. Vin didn't waste time. He moved quickly, following the trail of the black circle's men to the nearby building. The door was locked, but it didn't matter. With a swift kick, he broke it open, stepping into the dimly lit warehouse. He heard soft cries from the far corner. He turned toward the sound, finding the woman and her son, tied up but alive. Their eyes widened when they saw him, and for a moment, there was nothing but the relief in their gaze. "You're safe now," Vin said, cutting through their restraints. The woman managed a shaky smile. "I don't know how to thank you." Vin didn't answer. He had no time for thanks. His mission was clear, and it was far from over. He turned and moved toward the exit, leading them out of the building. As he stepped into the daylight, he knew that this would only be a temporary victory. The black circle was vast, and there were many more battles to fight. But for today, he had won.